I'm a linguist, but I can't study human subjects because my subjects are deceased, because I studied bilingualism in the Middle Ages. So in my research, I need to think outside the circle, which has been my transdisciplinary approach for the past 10 years of my project on bilingualism, which can be characterized in general in the following term. Bilingual individual learns two languages at home or at school or in any combination of those environments, and this learning allows the bilingual to communicate in those languages. Well, communication is a broad term, and I'm interested in the contact that occurs between languages during communication, such as the word washateria. Now, washateria is an example of an interference which, as psychological research has shown, occurs in the bilingual brain because of contact between languages. Interferences are common in the speech of Paraguay, which was once a remote colony where Guarani was never replaced by Spanish and where bilingualism evolved on Jesuit missions. Contact between Guarani and Spanish has produced so many interferences that many linguists consider Paraguayan Spanish to be a new language called Guarañol. And we see an example here on the screen that consists of a Guarani personal pronoun, pe, that's been fused onto the end of a Spanish phrase, meaning I go to night school, that's also been modified phonetically by Guarani. So I took the transdisciplinary step of considering the case of Guarañol in light of the Roman colony in Cantabria in northern Spain. Intense Romanization in southern Spain allowed Latin to replace the indigenous language. But just like Paraguay, Cantabria was a remote colony which allowed the indigenous language to survive and come into contact with Latin. Southern Cantabria is still a remote place. It's one of the greenest parts of Spain and largely rural. So I bought a bike and went biking down the back roads to look for traces of bilingualism in late antiquity. And I followed the Ebro River to Valderredible, which is a beautiful valley in southern Cantabria. It was about 300 square kilometers, where I found 7 caves. Now, these 7 caves may have been in use since prehistoric time, since Valderredible is 100 kilometers south of Altamira, which is one of the most important prehistoric caves in the world. The 7 caves are different sizes. The smallest on the upper left is about 30 square meters, and the largest on the lower left or right have 2 floors. But they were all carved into the soft sandstone rock, as the chisel marks reveal, as I'm explaining in this clip from a Spanish television documentary. Now, the 7 caves are located in proximity to the Ebro River in what may be called a nucleus. And there's an inscription in this one that may reveal when the rest of them, all of them, were cut into their present form. The inscription concerns the consecration of the cave as a church in a year revealed after the A in the upper left, which is the last letter in era, or Roman consular era, that appears in medieval Latin Iberian inscriptions before dates, which in this case is the year 687 AD. The caves are thus early medieval cave churches. Now, the conditions of the interiors of these cave churches are different. Campo de Ebro on the left has barely been touched. Cadalso has been completely refurbished, and Persillas on the bottom has 2 floors but has suffered a lot of deterioration. But they all contain interior church spaces. As we see here in Santa Maria de Valverde, in each one, a nave is cut towards the east that ends in an apse where an altar stands. And I noticed that dividing each apse from nave, there was an arch that wasn't semicircular but horseshoe-shaped. Now, I knew of horseshoe-shaped arches in Spain from the 10th century, but I had no idea if these were from that period because I had no idea how to talk about an arch that was cut into stone rather than being made out of cut stones. The solution was transdisciplinary. I spoke to some colleagues in architecture at UT, and they suggested I use a laser transit. So I wrote a grant proposal at UT to collaborate with a team of surveyors from the University of Cantabria. But before we could take the laser transit into the cave churches, we had to convince the local residents that we would not damage any of the interiors. It took a few weeks to survey the interiors, and I saw something that shed light on the bilingual culture I was studying. Because the drawings of the arches made possible with the laser transit allowed me to see that the dimensions of the horseshoe arches in the cave churches are narrower and shorter than 10th century Islamic horseshoe arches, and instead share the same dimensions as the horseshoe arches in the 6 remaining Visigothic masonry churches in Spain from the 7th century, when the cave churches were the center of a bilingual culture where languages came into contact. And we know it was a bilingual culture because the inscription I mentioned earlier is one of many inscriptions that have been found in and near the cave churches. Many of these inscriptions appear on stone tablets that are interesting sociologically, such as this one, which reveals a poignant moment that took place between mother and son 2,000 years ago. But many of these inscriptions, such as the one on the following screen, contain interferences that were produced by contact between the indigenous Cantabrian language and Latin. And my analysis of the interferences revealed that they were features of pre-Castilian or Spanish and not surrounding dialects such as Leonese or Aragonese. I say pre-Castilian because there was no Castile in the 7th and 8th centuries. Castile is a name that first appears around the year 800 to refer to the northern Christian Islamic frontier, where castros and the cave churches were among the many strategic structures that would come to be known as castles, as Castile became a kingdom in the 11th century. Well before this time, the cave churches were the home to a religious sect that followed a 6th century hermit named Millán, who was later named a saint and who, like St. James, was an important symbol of the Christian reconquest of Islamic Spain. Millán's followers cut living spaces in the place where he spent the last 30 years of his life, which may have been this cell in the 2nd floor of Valderredibe's cave church, which we see in the video. After Millán's death, his followers cut the caves into their present form as churches and received pilgrims during the early Middle Ages. Like the Jesuit missions of Paraguay, the cave churches of Valderredible served as a focal point for the Christianization of Cantabria, in turn fomenting bilingualism and spreading pre-Castilian. Well, my research into the genesis of the Spanish language as a result of prolonged bilingualism in southern Cantabria has drawn a lot of attention in the academic world and in the media. But for me, the greatest aspects of this dialogue is that it's not only transcontinental, it's transdisciplinary. And that's the way research is done every day at UT. Thank you.